No.
No? Who said no?
Betty,
Yeah.
he's trying to outclass you.
They're purple.
Go over and look at it.
I was looking at it when you came in. Your nice.
What is it?
Oh. I was going to say a Thunderbird maybe, but it's.
Well, it could be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very nice.
Well, the first thing should be, of all those who aren't here today, speak up.
Yes. Dr. Erickson, would you be willing to explain some of the things you've been doing the last couple of days?
Tell me what you know and I'll do it.
It's not, well, something isn't plugged in over there.
That's right, mine.
It's been pulled out.
For example,
I get, from the stories you tell, I understand bits of them, and I also can tell that there are other parts of them I'm not understanding. And I also wonder when you're working with us, when you're doing therapy with us, and when you're not.
I'm doing therapy with you when you take advantage of me.
So all the time. We're all taking advantage of you.
Yes, you.
I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you relating to hypnotism.
All right.
One is around the 11-year-old girl that was a bedwetter, and you helped her to discover something she already knew but didn't know she knew. When you described that case, you talked about putting her in a light trance or some kind of a trance first. And I didn't understand from the story what was the purpose of putting her in the trance. I didn't understand how hypnotizing her fit into the whole treatment.
The purpose of putting her in the trance was to hold her attention. Big girls squirm around enough, and younger girls squirm still more. I wanted her to sit still. I wanted to give her to give me her full attention. And then I also wanted her unconscious mind to be listening. So I took her out of the ordinary state of conscious awareness and limited her awareness to my voice and to the paperweight. And thus I had her whole attention. And in getting her whole attention, she absorbed everything I said without trying to elaborate it or dispute it. At the same time, I use here to show you that in the trance state, you can dispute. You don't have to accept. You're as free as you are in the waking state. When you're doing therapy, the dentist can tell you, hold your head still while he pulls a tooth. And you're not likely to do that.
I was freer in the trance state.
Hmm?
I was freer, more free in the trance state than in the waking state.
Yes, you had fewer restrictions because we learn a lot of restrictions. And you knew that while you argued with me and disputed me, there'd be no ill feeling on my part.
Yes. You wouldn't reject me.
I wouldn't reject you. So you were comfortable.
Very.
And while in a waking state, you can always say, will I offend him? Will he reject me? And today, what I think I'll do is to give you a purely psychological problem. A purely psychological and a very important problem. And I will ask you to try to understand it. I do a lot of hopeless things like that. As a bookkeeper in a Michigan hospital,
Thank you, Frank.
a bookkeeper in a Michigan hospital, a young man, I liked him very much. He was about 15 pounds underweight, and he belonged to the Greek Orthodox Church. He fell in love with a Greek Orthodox Church member, and she fell in love with him. And she was one of these utterly beautiful, voluptuous girls that could arouse a sexual response in any man who could see her. And of course, his big bookkeeping mates at the hospital ribbed him a lot, teased him a lot, told me he ever married that girl, she'd wear him down to a shadow. And they were married in the Greek Orthodox Church. The girl was, father had died when she was very, very small, 2 years old, something like that. And the mother had reared her. And the mother was a very devout church member. And she was very, very possessive of her daughter. And she taught her daughter to distrust men and to distrust all men. And it was an intensive conditioning the mother gave the girl. The mother approved of the young man, approved of the marriage, and openly expressed her hope for grandchildren. And during the marriage, of course, the ceremony was completed by a kiss, and a very chaste kiss in church. When they got home to their apartment, a young husband discovered that if you want to kiss his bride again, he could put his hand on her shoulder and no lower. And that night when they went to bed, they both went to bed happily, anticipating consummation of the marriage. But She got in on her side, and he got in on his side. And when he started to move over to her side of the bed, he became hysterical, frightened, slid out of bed, and cried and trembled. I was absolutely in utter fear. And that went on night after night. She knew that was wrong. He loved her. He thought she'd get over it. But as long as she was fully clothed, she could kiss him ardently. But he must not put his hands below her shoulders. And she knew that was wrong. And she tried to let him kiss her in her pajamas. When he went toward her, he kissed her in her pajamas. She became frightened, screamed, backed away from him, trembled, absolutely terrified. And 4 months later, he had lost another 40 pounds, and teased by his office mates. I had met the girl at a hospital picnic. She was a very nice, normal girl. She was friendly, agreeable. He was very much in awe of the superintendent, very much in awe of me, because I was next in rank to the superintendent. And she knew her husband's respect for me. After 4 months loss of 40 pounds, young man sought me out and told me, I can only kiss my wife if I've got my hands on her shoulders. I have to be very careful if I want to hug her to keep my hand on the back of her neck. I can't get near her in her pajamas. She knows it's wrong. She will sleep in the nude with me, but she won't let me touch her. If she senses my hand coming toward her in the bed, she slides out terrified. The tucks it over, fully dressed, at the table, and she says she can't help what she's doing, and I believe her. But I can't stand it go on like this. I love her, she loves me, we want children. You know how impossible it would be if we don't have intercourse. She will walk around in the nude in the bedroom. But if I make a move toward her, she goes into a panic state. I've discussed with her having psychotherapy, and she's very eager for it. And she's told me that you are the only man that she will talk to. You know, she can't talk to the superintendent, and she doesn't like to get a psychiatrist. But she has told me she'd like to talk to you. Her mother is worried, awfully frightened, because her mother wanted grandchildren right away. I agreed to take the case. How would you handle that case? Now, consider, if he reached out and touched her arm like that, she'd be across the room, trembling, screaming. If he touched her on the knee like that, she'd be across the room, screaming, trembling, literally out of her mind with terror. Her mother had done a very thorough job. He had the mother approve of marriage, and she wanted grandchildren. Now, how are you going to handle that case? How are you going to define it?
You're going to define it?
Define it as a therapeutic problem.
Dissociate her in some way.
Okay.
Dissociate her so that she could get through the experience without having to experience the fear.
A girl that frightened. Well, I'm straight the opposite. Now, under no circumstances would said you can awaken me by kissing me in the waking state for a group. She couldn't have done that. Isn't that right? And this girl, whether awake or in trance, her fear and terror are still there. And so hypnosis couldn't help. Besides, her problem was conscious. She knew about it. And you had to treat it in the conscious state. And the problem is unconscious. And difficulties with me were largely unconscious. Then she could take charge because she felt safe in the trance state. As a girl had been taught, all men had been deeply ingrained on her.
Well, it seems like the problem is conscious, but there's these unconscious elements in it.
That's right.
So,
Now, what was that unconscious element?
most likely the fear that her mother transmitted to her when she was, 3 years old.
Yes, but what did the mother do?
Specifically, what did the mother do? Now, what did you say happened to the father?
Died.
So the fear of losing a man.
She had no siblings.
So maybe did she sleep with her mother?
She grew up with her mother. No siblings.
Did she sleep with her mother?
In all other regards, her mother was a nice woman.
Afraid her mother transmitted to her if you get too close to a man.
Had transmitted to her an all-inclusive fear of men
Of being abandoned if you get too close.
and being dangerous.
Oh, her husband died.
And just falling in love and getting married could not dispute all her childhood, girlhood, young womanhood teachings.
No, it wouldn't.
Now, how would you handle that?
You would accept her fear.
All right, the first thing you need to do is recognize the problem is hers, all hers, and not her husband's.
That's what you.
It wasn't her husband's problem. He was ready to consummate the marriage many, many times, but she wasn't. So it was her problem.
Such a mystery. Yeah. Went down.
So how are you going to handle the
I
problem?
think you'd have to do some kind of age regression and get her back to. You'd have to do some kind of age regression and get her back to that age when she learned those fears, so that she could unlearn them.
There's a lot of truth in when you live in a beach city like Detroit to avoid strange men.
There's a lot of truth.
Mm-hmm.
You're not
To
a
sep-
strange man.
To do some reality testing on how to separate out who to be fearful of and who not to be fearful of.
That's right. Her mother hadn't done that.
Mm-hmm. She hadn't been discriminating enough. That it's a good fear, but it only applies in certain places,
Yes.
not in others.
But still, all children, little girls, are taught to fear strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Strange man.
And parents fail to know what a stranger is to a child.
What was that?
Parents fail to explain to a child who a stranger is. A nicely dressed man, a nice car, like Daddy's car, is not a stranger. He's too much like Daddy. Illustrate discrimination that should be taught. A wife, Betty Ellis, and 3 years old Roxana and 18 months old Christina are with them in Detroit. And Betty Ellis and their mother wanted to go shopping at Hudson's department store. I told the little girls, you play in the sandbox. Don't leave the sandbox. Stay there and play there. Don't leave it. They came out after the store had closed for the day and headed for the playground provided by Hudson's department store. And there are no little girls. And neither Betty Ellis nor her mother could understand why Roxanne and Christina had disobeyed. No little girls in the sandbox. Betty Ellis said, you go this way and I'll go that way, looking for the girls. Just then, a very red-faced policeman came around the corner, a little girl at each hand. And Roxanne explained, we had to go to the bathroom, so we asked the policeman. Well, there was a policeman on duty in that, on the grounds there, just to protect little children. And they knew enough that to recognize him as a policeman. And police protect people. And that poor policeman was so red-faced when Roxana gave her explanation. But I think he felt very proud when he got home. And two little girls had recognized that he was their protector. Now that's discrimination, incorrect discrimination. They couldn't ask a clergyman, a priest. You don't know who wears the habit, who wears his collar around backwards. The children weren't old enough to make that kind of discrimination. If they could discriminate police. All right. I told the young man I would see his wife, and she came in very embarrassed that Saturday afternoon. I questioned her about being in love with her husband, about her mother's teachings, about their bedtime behavior. She's awfully ashamed of it, said I can't help it. And she explained to me she wanted to have the marriage consummated, and she wanted to get pregnant. It's very important to her mother to have grandchildren. She lost her husband and couldn't have more children, and she did want grandchildren. And I agreed with the girl, her mother was entitled to grandchildren. Now, she was seeing me because of all the doctors at the hospital, I was the one that she had selected as being safe. And she was very free and explaining the difficulty. And her story was corroborated by the story that her husband had told me. So how could I get the girl to handle the situation?
Well, since it was her mother that gave her the indiscriminate teaching, could you talk to the mother and get the mother to re-instruct her daughter with the proper kind of discrimination?
You speak English. You speak French.
Slightly.
You speak Japanese.
Not at all.
If you married a Japanese girl, could your mother tell you how to do love talk to a Japanese girl?
My mother?
Hmm?
No.
She was Japanese?
No.
No. Then how can your mother tell you how to do
She couldn't understand
How
that
could
kind
she
of adult
teach her
talk.
love talk to anybody when she didn't know about it herself.
Her mother had given her one kind of instruction, a language of fear. And that's a language she could understand. I've given you a tip.
She needed to learn the language of love.
Hmm?
She needed to learn the language of love.
Yeah. And how could I teach her that?
Well, the most likely person would be her husband to teach her that.
And he had been at 4 months.
That's true.
Something already was going on between you and her. She had already said that he is the only man.
That's that?
Something already was going on with her in regard to you. You were the only man that she trusted. And you were already beginning to teach her that. I mean, the seed was already there between you and her.
All right. I'll tell you what I did. I said, today's Saturday.
Today is Saturday.
Today's Saturday. And you recognize that consummation of marriage is important. And you could consummate the marriage tonight, but I prefer Friday. You could consummate the marriage tomorrow, Sunday night. And I would prefer Friday. You might on Monday night, but I would prefer Friday. You might on Tuesday night, but I would prefer Friday. You might on Wednesday, I would prefer Friday. You might on Thursday night, but I would prefer Friday. I've named all the days of all the years yet to come. And Friday was my night. Marriage was consummated. I told her husband, you go to bed, go to sleep, and be totally passive. And never make a move. Saturday night passed. Now her husband making a move. Her making a move. Saturday night gone. Sunday night, same thing. And my night of Friday was getting closer. Tuesday night, and by Wednesday night, and my night of Friday, my night was getting closer. On Thursday night, she wakes her husband sound asleep and raped him.
Thursday night?
Yeah, after 11 o'clock.
But it wasn't Friday.
No. I gave her a chance to be afraid man on Friday night.
I thought you were giving her permission that way.
No, I gave her this situation where she could be afraid of a man on Friday. And she waited until the last possible hour. And it was her problem. And she raped him.
And then he was your patient after that.
No. And that surprised him, but he functioned adequately. But her mother had never told her to be careful that she didn't rape men.
It's true.
Her mother had told her to fear a man and never said anything about her attacking men. So I set up a situation in which she could take the initiative and attack a man. And she had never been taught not to rape a man. So I just filled in where the mother had left a vacancy. And I gave her me to fear as a representative of all men. And the young husband told me about it on Friday morning. Said, after she raped me and tried to go to sleep, and we decided to have intercourse. We had it before breakfast too, and we're going to have it tonight. The entire barrier had been broken. And I told you, it's her problem. And she had to solve it.
But what about her trust in men? I mean, that barrier was broken, but what about her
trusted me.
Trusting men.
And she didn't know I was teaching her to fear me. All I said was I would prefer that she and her husband consummate the marriage on Friday night, my night. That brought me into a three-sided sexual relationship.
But do you think, I mean, that broke the sexual barrier, but what effect do you think that had on her ability to trust men, ultimately? Or does it make
She
any difference?
trusted her husband. She loved him. It was just in the sexual area that she had these prohibitions. But he said she was normal in other ways.
Her fear of all men, including her husband. She respected me because of my position of trust in the hospital, a 4,000-bed hospital, medical school, Michigan State University, Wayne State University graduate school. She had 3 professorships. And she knew that everybody respected me. So I could be a man safe to talk to. And when I started preferring Friday night, I too became a sexual man. And she knew she could still trust me and recognize I was a sexual man. And her escape from me and do the one thing her mother had forgotten to warn her about, her raping a man. And that was her problem.
That reminds me of your story about this girl, Cinnamon Face, in that you provided a channel for the anger or a channel for the fear, and that was a critical part of the treatment, giving the child someone to be angry at, and giving the woman someone to fear.
You steal and channel her anger.
And with this woman, you channeled her fear toward yourself.
I channeled her fear about my Friday night. And so she ran away from that and raped her husband, and having had sex relations, then her husband was accessible to her.
Then her husband was.
Her husband was accessible to her. It's very like a little baby gets a hold of a sharp butcher knife and gripping it by the blade. How are you going to take that sharp butcher knife away from the baby?
Distract the baby with the toy.
Offer it something else to hold on to.
What is she going to trade that butcher knife? It is bright and shiny.
Depend on the kid, candy or something else bright and shiny, something that wiggles.
What? Everybody else sat on the floor, a sharp butcher knife in her hand. And she didn't bright enough to recognize Mother had always put such things out of her reach. She finally got a hold of one. She wasn't going to let Mother take it away from her. So I said, that's pretty. Up in the bedroom, got a hand mirror. So near a window. Have a mirror so it would reflect the sun against the ceiling. I wiggled it, and bright spot went all around everywhere. And she took the mirror away from me. And I had the butcher knife. You see, you should deal with children at their level. Try to tell a little baby like that. Many else you couldn't tell anything to. Now the steam was first turned on in the hospital where we lived. Because we lived in a hospital building. I took her into the steam register and pointed to it and said, baby, hurt baby, make baby cry. Don't touch, baby get burned. Yeah, I was giving her orders. So he grabbed a hold of it and found it let loose. I took her out in the other room, touched her hand. I took her into another bedroom, went to another register, and heard baby, make baby cry, bite baby, burn baby. He slapped it with the other hand.
Oh no.
So I dressed that hand, and then I took her into another room and pointed, bite baby, hurt baby, make baby cry. And this time, the exploring finger moved slowly. She felt the heat, drew her away. I had a collection of cactus. I picked out cactus with the least dangerous thorns. I took Betty out and said, mustn't touch. Bite baby, hurt baby, baby cry. She took good grip. So I pulled the stickers out and touched her head. And I showed her another cactus. I said, bite baby, hurt baby, baby cry. So she slapped it. I touched her hand again. And then I showed her another cactus. An exploring finger. And when she felt the thorn, her curiosity was satisfied.
She had that Erickson drive.
Or stupidity.
No. I want to learn myself.
You see, I taught my children not to be afraid of things, but to try to handle them correctly, no matter what they were. I taught my children, never let anybody hurt your feelings. If somebody tries and they succeed, rush, run. Don't walk to the nearest garbage can and dump your hurt feelings. She graduated mid-year in Michigan as a teacher and applied for a job in industrial Detroit. And she noticed all the teachers had their faces averted. She read the contract. She noticed the school board were holding their breath while she was reading the contract. And she wanted a job, so she signed the contract. The first thing that happened was an old biddy on the faculty said we must give the new teacher a welcome party. And when that old biddy made that announcement, all the other teachers looked at the floor. They had hangdog looks on their faces, and nobody else looked at Betty Ellis. And Betty Ellis said, this has every evidence of proving to be a disagreeable situation. And it's a party I don't want to miss. So she arranged me the last one to arrive. She rang the doorbell. The old biddy opened the door, took her gently by the arm. Led her out the middle of the room. Then Alice didn't know what was coming. All the teachers were looking at the floor, the wall. The old Betty said, Miss Erickson, in all my years of teaching, I have never before encountered anybody so ignorant, so stupid, so ill-fitted, so incompetent, so unprepared to teach.
My goodness.
Football is.
And Betty Alice smiled happily and modestly and said, that's because I worked so hard at it. That's because I worked so hard at it. And the old biddy left, and the teachers all had a good time. And high school teachers told one of my sons, that was the most idiotic, utterly stupid performance, worst I've ever seen. And my son said wonderingly, and I wasn't even half trying. You don't take insults. You leave them with the insulter. It's his problem. And in therapy, your patient will come to you with hurt feelings. My husband called me an ignorant, incompetent non-entity. Is that best your husband could do? Is his vocabulary lacking? He must have meant something. But what did he mean using just those few words? And she starts looking at the insult in a different way. Because I've discredited the insult. Always turn any insult, always misunderstand it as a compliment. And that baffles a person. Are you really that stupid? Only on Wednesdays. Yeah. What do you do with that answer?
Just stuck with it.
You're a homeless girl I ever met. That's why I won the title on the 31st of February, leap year.
What was that?
You're the holiest girl I ever met. And says, well, that's why I won the title on the 31st of February. Leap year.
Well, what are they going to do? Your very stupid remark. They're going to try to make sense out of it. And that's their problem. I know Mrs. Erickson fell down the basement steps. And Betty Alice was in the basement. About 9 years old. And as her mother was picking herself up, Betty Alice said, "Why did you do that, Mother?" And Betty's reaction was one of rage and then total amusement. It helped soothe her bruises. And one day in the Hilton Hotel in Detroit, I liked him there. Betty was with me, Betty Alice, and Betty Alice's roommate. And I got on the elevator alone afterwards. The operator complimented me on my two very beautiful daughters. And later that day, in the evening, we got on, same elevator. Kelly, Betty Alice, Betty, and I, and a very drunk doctor got on. He propositioned Mrs. Erickson quite plainly. And she misunderstood him, be inquiring about the obscure English philosopher Penelon, named Penelon. So she told, "Oh, you mean Penelon, that obscure English philosopher?" And the drunk looked at her. How should we get a broad B? We asked him much more plainly. At that time, she misunderstood him inquiring about Descartes, the French mathematician. And he was so disgusted, he turned to Kelly and said, "Will you come up to my room and look at my etchings?" Kelly said, "No." So he got off. The elevator operated, and then Betty Alice said, "Mama, didn't you know he was propositioning you?" And Mama said, "Of course I did, but he doesn't know I know." And the poor operator, hearing Betty Alice, whom she called my daughter, say "Mama" to my other daughter. So in therapy, when your patient says something, is tangential for your therapy, is understand it, give a new interpretation, and make that tangential remark totally useless. And patients will try to quarrel with a therapist or try to lead the therapist to look in the wrong direction. And you can use your own stupidity to keep right on the right track.
Could you give another example of that in a therapy situation?
The alcoholic was telling all about his drinking, his slow increase in drinking, his first drunk, his second drunk, his first prolonged drunk, and then he made some idiotic accusation against his mother, trying to distract you from his story being drunk and lead you astray on defending his mother. I would say, did she have one or two legs?
Perfect. Beat them at their own game.
Hmm?
You beat them at their own game.
I beat them with the whole game. That usually gets a laugh, and we go right back to drunkenness. Actually, you let the patient guide the interview. It's your task to guide it. Now, I told you a man in a group that came here to get instruction about terminal disease in children, how he lost 159 pounds. And I had never mentioned weight. Well, just being in the group, hearing me discuss children, he applied what I said to himself. Because he was a child in relationship to himself, a spoiled and selfish child. Now, in October 6, 1956, I was invited to address a national convention of psychiatrists at the Boston State Hospital. Leo Alexander was the doctor in charge of the program. When I arrived, he asked me to talk on hypnosis. Then said, could you give a very complete demonstration? I said, I can call them members of the audience. And if I do that, they'll all have a feeling they miss them. And both you and I know that they won't miss anything. There'll be a general feeling of dissatisfaction. And they will have learned without knowing they've learned. I'd prefer some subject I could invite. He said, well, why don't you go around on boards and find a suitable subject? I went around various wards. I saw a nurse who intrigued me. He was a very responsive nurse. I knew it would be no problem at all to put her in a trance. And so I told Dr. Alexander, I seen a nurse, told him her name, and said she volunteered. She knew nothing about hypnosis, never heard a lecture, never saw a demonstration. Otherwise, she's a perfect subject. When I told Dr. Alexander her name, he said, "Oh, no. That girl has been in psychoanalysis for 2 years. She is a compensated depressive." In case you don't know what that means, is a depressed patient who is compensated for depression and just absorbing herself in her work and doing very well with the absolutely rigid intention of bringing it to a sharp halt. And everybody in the hospital knew that nurse was going to resign from the hospital on October 20th. And she was going to commit suicide. That she had already given away all of her jewelry and a lot of her clothes, keeping just enough to last until October 20th. And this is October the 6th. He said, that girl's going to commit suicide. We all know it. We're all prepared for it. And nobody can talk the girl out of it. And we're all alarmed. She does her work perfectly. She won't hear anything about her plans. And she's dead set on it. I said, well, I promised the girl. The girl promised me. If I refuse to use her, I can be the final rejection of her. And she commit suicide before October 20th. So I don't see any way out of the trap I've got myself into except to use her. And the entire staff, all our friends argued with me, but I couldn't see any way out of it except by using her. So I gave my lecture. I called on a few of the audience to demonstrate hand levitation or anesthesia or some minor thing. And then I called Anne. I told Anne where to sit in the auditorium. I called her and stand up. She stood up, and I said, now, Anne, walk up to the stage and come all the way to me. And don't walk too fast. Don't walk too slowly. And with each step, go a little way into the trance so that when you get all the way up to me, you'll be in a deep trance. And that's your walk with a measured step all the way up. When she arrives on the stage and he meets me, her eyes are open, and she was in a very deep, deep trance. And I said, where are you? She said, here. I said, where is here? He said, with you. Is there anybody else around? No. Where are you? Here with you. Not out there, nothing. There, nothing. And total negative hallucination for all our surroundings. I demonstrated catalepsy in her. She was already demonstrating negative hallucinations. And then I said to her, you know, Anne, there's such a thing as time distortion in hypnosis. Would you like to know what time distortion is? She interested. And I said, a minute can seem like an hour, or hours can seem like just a few minutes. You can expand time. You can contract time. You know, when you drop a medicine in the eye of a child, the child, he waits and waits and waits and waits and waits until just a second or two. But to the child, he was waiting. And you would have friends come and visit you hadn't seen for a long time, and stay all afternoon. And at 6 o'clock, you all say, what happened to the day? The whole day has disappeared so rapidly. You can expand time, you contract time. So I gave her a few lessons in time distortion. And then I suggested that we go to the Boston Arboretum. She promptly hallucinated us in the Boston Arboretum. I pointed to the annuals that were dying, and how they would be replanted next spring. Perennials, they were dying too, and they would come to life again next spring, all by themselves. I pointed to the leaves that were changing color. It's October. And New England is a very nice place to see the changing color of leaves. And I pointed out various shrubs, bushes, vines, and trees. Discussed the flowering and development of seed and fruit, and how many plants distribute their seeds in various ways. Dandelion by having down, the wind takes a seed and carries it. The seeds are eaten by birds, not digested, but they're spread around. And I had a very interesting trip to the Arboretum. You went in rather rapid time because I had Anne enlarging mentally on everything I said. I didn't have to say very much. And the audience could hear me talking about the Arboretum. And then I suggested we go to the Boston Zoo. I told her it was a baby kangaroo. She'd never seen one. Oh, she hallucinated being in the zoo. We looked at baby kangaroo, the adult ones, lions, their cubs, and tigers and their cubs, and wolves and their whelps, and the elephants and the monkeys and so on, bears. And then went to the aviary and looked at the birds. I spoke about migration of birds, how a tern born in the Arctic hatched out one summer in the Arctic. When the right time comes, it flies 10,000 miles to the tip of South America. It doesn't have the compass it has in a college education. It finds its way anyway. I spoke about the wonders of living creatures. And then went back to the hospital. I gave her a positive view of the audience. I let various members of the hospital staff talk to her and demonstrate rapport. He talked to them, and not as a nurse, but as an equal. He's a very lovely subject. And then I suggested Anne. Hospital is boring. Let's walk down to Boston Beach. Spoke about beach having been there long before the white men, enjoyed by the Indians, countless generations of Indians. Been countless generations of whites, pale faces, who had enjoyed the beach. And Boston present, very lovely beach, being enjoyed by the current generation. Yet that beach would remain there permanent for future generations. And I had a look at the ocean as it was smooth, small waves on it, huge waves. He talks about the inhabitants of the ocean, the migrations of the green turtle, of whales, of salmon, and the mysterious ways of finding home in some river, salmon, the eels, the hatchin on the land, go down the river, and nobody knows where they go. And eventually they return to the land by their eggs. Same with salmon. Same with green turtle. And spoke out all the mystery of the ocean. How mysterious it was. You had to watch the tide go out and come back in. I see a violent storm on the ocean, and we wandered back to the hospital and did a few more things. And I thanked her very profusely in the trance state, and I awakened her and thanked her for her services. She was obviously surprised. She thought she just arrived on the platform, had total amnesia, and dismissed her. She went back to the board to complete the day's work. And the audience discussed her performance with me, asking a lot of questions. Next day, Anne did not come to work. Alarmed her friends. Next day, she didn't show up for work. Went to her apartment, couldn't find any traces of her uniform. Just a few clothes she had kept. She was an orphan, had no siblings. The police were called in to missing person. The police could find no trace of her body. A year later, when I lectured in Boston, Dr. Alexander and I were very unpopular. Nothing had been heard from Anne. 5 years later, everybody had forgotten Anne, except Dr. Alexander and me. Still no traces. 10 years later, no traces. 15 years later, no traces. And 16 years later, on an afternoon, I got a long-distance call from Florida. A woman's voice said, "You probably will not remember me. My name is Anne. I was a nurse you used as a subject at Boston State Hospital in 1956. I was thinking today you might like to know what had happened to me." And so I was very interested. Upon leaving work, she went to a naval recruiting station. And she demanded immediate induction into the Navy. And all her credentials. The Navy took her in, served a couple of enlistments, and then she was discharged in Florida. Got a job in the hospital there. Met a retired Air Force officer. Married him. Had 5 children. And I was doing therapy the whole time, and nobody knew it. I was discussing life, various forms of life, beauty of life. Everybody thought I was lecturing on hypnosis and demonstrating hypnosis, and didn't know I was doing any therapy either. Just being a good subject. I knew what I was doing, nobody else did. So therapy can be done, and your patient makes their own interpretation, places their own value about what you say, and they apply it to themselves any way they wish. Also at that meeting, a woman approached me, gray-haired woman. She said, "How are you, Dr. Erickson? You remember me?" I said, "Your question implies I should. I really don't remember you." He said, "I'm grandmother now." I said, "There are grandmothers every day, have been for a long time." She laughed and said, "Oh, I'll give you another clue. You wrote a paper about me." I said, "I've written a lot of papers and forgotten what I put in." And she said, "Oh, I'll give you one more clue. John is still practicing internal medicine." I said, "Hello, Florence. I'm glad to see you again." When I first went to Worcester State Hospital on research service, I was first psychiatrist on the research service, just building it up then. I was very, very busy. I learned working on the general mental hospital staff was a resident in psychiatry, a beautiful young girl, very brilliant, very good looking. And the entire staff was worried about her. Her residency was going to end at the end of June. And in January, he developed a very bad neurosis. And she sought help because he was having stomach problems, colitis, insomnia, losing weight. He was afraid of everything. Could only feel comfortable working on the ward with patients. And she worked from early in the morning till late at night. And she tried to talk to various staff members. She didn't know what was wrong, didn't know what had caused it, but she knew she was awfully neurotic and fearful and worried and afraid, terrified. And the staff was very concerned about her. She had been a very brilliant, very competent resident. Now she was breaking down into a basket case. I was too busy on the research service doing anything about it. One day, she showed up in my office and said, "Dr. Erickson, I've attended some of your lectures on hypnosis, and I've watched what you've done with hospital employees and with patience. I'd like to have you come to my apartment and put me in a trance tonight. I have a problem. And when you arrive at my apartment tonight at 7 o'clock, don't be alarmed if I've forgotten that I invited you to come. Just come right in, no matter what I say to you. When I arrived at her apartment at 7 that night, he was awfully surprised, but courteously invited me in the apartment. I sat down, and then a social chatter about it being my first spring in New England. I didn't know anything about New England. I'd come from Wisconsin, Colorado, and I'd seen the Atlantic Ocean for the first time. She gradually went into a hypnotic trance. As soon as she's in a very deep trance, she said, "Dr. Erickson, I had you come here to put me in a trance. I've got a problem. I don't dare to face it. But I have to face it. I don't know what the problem is. I want you to keep me in a trance. Send me in my bedroom. Tell me to lie down on the bed and go to work on my problem. Return in 1 hour and ask me if I'm through." I obeyed her instructions. Picked up a book and read until 8 o'clock. I then asked her if she was through. She said, "Not yet. It'll be at least another hour." I'm back to my reading. At 9 o'clock I went in. She said, "It's longer than I thought." And just wait and come in at 10 o'clock. Came in at 10 o'clock. Said, "I'm almost through. It'll take me about another half hour." In the half hour, 10:30, I went in. She sighed and said, "I'm all through. Now have me come out in the living room and tell me to have a total amnesia for everything. Absolutely total amnesia. And awaken me gently. I'll be surprised to find you there. Now I have a total amnesia. Don't worry about that. And before you leave, tell me it's all right to know just the answer." And I sat her in the chair she had been in. And so I proceeded to awaken her by continuing chattering about spring in New England. He awakened, obviously bored by what I had to say about New England. All of a sudden, she happened to see the clock. I read 11 o'clock. "Dr. Erickson, it's 11 o'clock, and what are you doing in my apartment this hour? Will you please leave?" I said, "Certainly." Opened the door, step out. I said, "It's all right to know just the answer." And she blushed and said, "A thought came to me. I'm not prepared to face. So will you leave? Leave now. Hurry up. Get out." So I got out. I didn't see her the rest of that month of June. her residency on June 30th. I didn't know where she went. I was too busy on research service by now. July passed, August passed, and then the last week of September, he came rushing into my office. He said, Dr. Erickson, I've got something I should tell you, and you don't know what it is. I'll have to go into detail. Last June, well, this morning I was lying in bed. I'm working at the, she named the state hospital, about 40 miles away, near Smith College. And I'm on psychiatric service, and my husband, John, is on medical service. Today is my day off. I was lying in bed, enjoying, and thinking what a fortunate girl I was. And I had met John and fallen in love with him. John had fallen in love with me. I was thinking of all the happiness since our marriage last July. And I was just reveling in happiness, way a bride can revel in. Now she's married the right man, he loves her and she loves him. Everything is wonderful and rosy. And all of a sudden I remember inviting you to my apartment last June. And I didn't remember when you showed up. I invited you. I was just surprised. I tried to be polite. And you started talking about spring in New England. I went in a trance. I told you I had a problem I couldn't face. I told you to send me into my bedroom. Come back in an hour's time. And then you were to tell me when I went into my bedroom, lie down on the bed and work on my problem. I told you to come back in an hour's time. You did, but I wasn't through. Came back at 9 o'clock. I was through. At 10 o'clock, I wasn't through. And at 10:30, I was through. And when I lay down on the bed and work on my problem, a great long manuscript unrolled and lined down the middle. On one side were the pros, on the other side were the cons. I concerned John. You see, I come from a very wealthy, very snobbish family. And everything was easy for me in school. I always got A's in college and medical school. I didn't have to work hard. My family was wealthy. I had all the advantages of wealth and social position. And traveled abroad, been to New York for concerts, symphonies, a theater. And then last December, at a party, I met John. John was a young physician, interested in internal medicine. I liked him as soon as I met him. And he returned a liking. I soon found out that John came from a very poor home on the other side of the tracks. And his parents were uneducated. John had to work his way through high school. He wasn't brilliant, got B's and C's. Now he was ambitious. He worked his way through college and worked his way through medical school. He was interested, very greatly interested in internal medicine. And I knew that I was much brighter than John. I came from a wealthy, snobbish family. I've been trained to be a snob in my childhood. And John, lesser intelligence, and had no advantages, just those of poverty. And he was a dedicated internist. And I was interested in psychiatry. I liked it a lot. But my snobbish rearing made me realize a snob could not marry a poor man, especially a man who was inferior intellectually. And so I developed a neurosis. I forgot all about John. All I knew was I was worried, full of fear, uncertainty. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I lost weight. I had colitis. I was almost a basket case. And you came to my apartment. You put me in a trance. I saw that long manuscript unroll. On one side were the pros, the other side were the cons. The pros and cons are marrying John. I started reading all the pros and all the cons. A long, slow, hard job and thinking through the pros and cons. It took a long time. Then I began casting out the cons that were compensated by the pros. I had a long, hard job. And finally, it came at 10 o'clock. I had left. I had all cons canceled out. My pros had canceled it. I still had a long list of prose I had not read yet. So I spent that time from 10 o'clock to 10:30 reading the prose. And then I knew, despite our different background, John and I could get married. And I told you, give me a total amnesia for everything. And when you left, tell me it's all right to know the answer. When you started to leave, you stopped and said, it's all right to know just the answer. A thought came to my mind. Now I can marry John. I wasn't prepared for that. I think I was rude to you. I told you to leave. And this morning, reveling in my happiness in bed, all that memory came back to me suddenly. I dressed quickly, didn't stop for breakfast, drove as fast as I could here, Northampton. And now you know what my neurosis was and how you served to do therapy on me. Yes, I did therapy on her. And lasted, she was a grandmother until happily married. And John was still in internal medicine. And she was still in psychiatry. I'd done therapy without knowing I was doing therapy. I didn't know what the problem was. All I knew was that she was a neurotic girl. And she asked me to put her in trance. Now you can do therapy without knowing a thing about a patient. And you can do therapy without a patient knowing you're doing therapy. And you can have an amnesia for therapy. At the right time, there can be a recollection of everything important.
What was that last sentence?
At the right time, there can be a recollection of everything that's important. I have several cases like that I treated and didn't write out or publish. Now here's a case where I did therapy. By actually being offensive to the patient. I first went to Michigan. I saw one of the hospital employees. The girl was pretty from the knees down, pretty from the waist up. And she had the biggest panty I had ever seen on any girl. It was enormous. I saw her walking down the hospital corridor, and she passed something, made a vicious swing in her panty to knock that person down. And I knew she hated her great big panty. And that interested me, a girl who hated herself. I kept my eye on her. Didn't take long to find out she was a medical technician. And from my office, I could see her on her days off, standing at the gate to the grounds, greeting mothers who had small children with them. And I could see the girl ask a question, nod her head. And the girl would give the child a gum or a toy or a piece of candy and ask the mother another question, mother would nod her head. I see the girl take charge of the small child. How the mother came to the hospital to visit with a sick relative. And also the girl would sometimes collect 30 little kids to look after her. And she always did it on her day off through all the good weather, spring, summer, and autumn. That was her day off, babysitting a lot of strange kids, old kids. And after about a year, he developed hiccups night and day. Visiting staff with 169 men from Detroit. They all examined her. Also staff too. And everybody agreed there was nothing wrong with her physically. And everybody recommended psychiatric consultation. And the girl flatly refused. She knew who the psychiatrist was and be called in. And she didn't like the idea of having me interview her. So she held out, hiccuping, night and day for another 3 weeks. And her boss in the medical laboratory got it. Discussed and went to see her and said, "Now look here, miss. You're getting pre-hospital care. I'm keeping your job open for you, And even though you're sick of bed, you're getting paid regularly. Your sickness isn't causing you any trouble. And all the staff recommend a psychiatric consultation. You're refusing. So I've come here to give you an ultimatum. Either you accept the psychiatric consultation or take the cell phone, call your private ambulance, and get yourself admitted to a private hospital. You'll pay the ambulance, you'll pay private hospital, you'll lose your job, and you'll lose your pay. And God agreed to have a psychiatric consultation. Our boss notified me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I went over to see her. I walked into her room, closed the door behind me, held my hand up this way, and said, keep silent, don't say a word until I have finished speaking. You won't understand what I'm going to say to you. Now listen carefully, and I want to make it very plain. You've got the biggest, fattest behind I've ever seen on a girl. And also, you have never read the Song of Solomon in your Bible.
And also,
Song of Solomon.
Song of Solomon.
Apparently you haven't either.
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta look at me very puzzled. I said, just because you have a great big fat derriere, you think no man will be interested in you. Now, you read the Song of Solomon, you know a certain kind of man will be very interested in you. You think that great big pan of yours is a handicap, and it isn't. Because if you'd read the Song of Solomon, you would know that any man who wanted to be the father of many children, and look at your great big fat fanny, and he would see a lovely cradle for children. So, in the Bible, you're stand beside your bed. After I leave, you read the Song of Solomon and see if that isn't the way a man who wants children will see your big fat fanny, a cradle for children. Now, don't get over your hiccups now. Wait until 10:30 or 11 o'clock tonight. Then everybody can think it was a spontaneous cure, that I had nothing to do with it. You put her hiccuping sometime after 10:30 that night. A few months later, he waited until my secretary went to lunch. He came to the office and showed me her engagement ring. He said, I thought you should be the first to see it. Sometime later, she went to my secretary, gone to lunch, and she brought in her fiancé to meet me. Then we started talking socially, and during the course of conversation, I found out his occupation. I think it was insurance. He owned a piece of land near Detroit, and he and the girl are drawing up the plans for the house that she built on that land. They have 5 bedrooms and big nursery. He wanted children. And he knew a cradle for children. They saw one.
What about the hiccups?
The hiccups,
Yeah, I know.
they disappeared.
Why did she have them in the first place?
She hated herself. She had to express it in some way. And her hiccups drew attention to her. I was kindly and favorable. She would lie in bed all covered up. So people would sympathize with her, look at her kindly, and try to treat her for hiccups. And never look at her panty. Very crude to my approach. You got a great big panty. You're afraid you'll never get married. You're mistaken because you haven't read the Song of Solomon in the Bible. Now that kind of a statement, it compels attention. And I'm spoken with bare truth, very crudely. I didn't hammer a wall around it. I gave her a new interpretation and placed upon her body. And girls with piano legs, their ankles are bigger than their knees should be. They have 2 tree trunks for legs. What man's going to marry them? A man who likes a good foundation for a family. He wants children. And one such nurse who reached the age of 30, I came on the ward to make rounds. She's the nurse in charge. He stood up behind her desk. Her desk was in a peculiar corner-wise position. She stood behind it and let the nurse second in charge make rounds with me. And the nurse in charge should do that. The position of her desk, deploying the second in charge to make rounds with me. I knew there was something wrong, so it didn't take long to find out why her desk was in that peculiar position. A year later, she came in to tell me about her piano legs. And so I explained what piano legs really meant. The kind of men that would appreciate piano legs. And she left the hospital. A dental intern across the hospital corridor came rushing in my office and said, "Who's that nurse you just left your office?" I said, "She's a hospital employee. What's her name?" I don't talk about people's names. He said, "I want to meet that nurse. I want her name. I'm not a marriage broker." And you are dental intern, but you have worked here long enough to know that most of the employees of this hospital live in West Dearborn, or East Dearborn, or even in Detroit. And the bus service brings them to work in the morning, takes them home at night. and a bus stopped just across Michigan Avenue. I rushed to the window and saw him and a nurse waiting. It was winter time, so he grabbed his coat, overcoat, rushed to the bus stand. And the following New Year's Day, they held an open house. Mrs. Erickson and I were the only, I was the only doctor invited. And she took me aside to the side room and said, "It's hard to believe." When my husband proposed me, he said I had the foundation for a good, large family. And Marie had 5 children within 6 years. And both wanted children. Now, I had been polite and tried to teach Marie that piano legs are unlovely. I just told her the kind of a man that would admire piano legs. You see, in therapy, your patient should have an appreciation that you are not afraid to tell the truth. They are afraid of the truth. And they try to beat around the bush. You tell a homely girl she's homely, and she looks in the mirror, she knows she is. Don't try and tell her she's plain looking. If she's homely, tell her so. And don't let her tell you that she's a trifle overweight when she's 100 pounds overweight. You know, I told you about the girl who had a spastic left arm, spastic left leg. And her hand kept waving all over and her leg kept going. He came in to see me. He said, I didn't come because of spasticity in my arm and leg. I can't control it. She's demonstrating the fact. He said, I'm trifle overweight. I want some help in that regard. I said, and that's my favorite name for patients.
What?
Favorite name for patients is Anne.
You need therapy. Now let's start out on a completely honest basis. You got your spasticity in your left side. You tell me from a smallpox inoculation when you were 7 years old. Now that's a reasonable explanation. And I do know that there can be a localized encephalitis that can cause that type of spasticity. Also told me you couldn't control that you want to see me because you were a trifle overweight. Now, let's be honest. You can control that spasticity. Just put your left hand under that great big panty of yours and sit down. You control the spasticity and cross your big fat right thigh over your left thigh And that will control us. That's just there. And then we can take up the fact that you are not a trifle overweight. You're greatly overweight. Now that discourteous, impolite way told the patient, I wasn't afraid of her condition. I wasn't going to pussyfoot around. I deal directly. You have to have a kind of personality that allows you to be direct. Some people have to pussyfoot and don't know how to attack directly. She slimmed down after 3 meetings. And I made her take all the blame for her being overweight. I said, you're the only one that stuffs food in your mouth. Nobody else does that. You do.
The only one that does was
Stuff food in your mouth. Nobody else does that. Many years later, she's working with Bird Halstead's laboratory in Chicago. She worked with brain-damaged children, deaf children, blind children, and taught them how to take care of themselves. It's her view. She's an excellent therapist, a blind and deaf and brain damaged. Retired. And she knew I was lecturing in Chicago. And so she called me in my hotel and asked me if she could take me out to dinner. And I agreed. She picked me up at the hotel and said, I'm taking you to a restaurant. I know it's good. I'm doing an experiment with you. You're going to walk in that restaurant. Nobody knows me. Nobody knows you at that restaurant. And we'll see what happens. I wonder what she's up to. I wear the rush over, helped me off with my overcoat. He noticed my limp. He didn't notice hers. She too had a limp, but it was less than mine. Her experiment was, had she sufficient control of her limp, a waiter would notice mine, but not hers.
That was the experiment.
Did you
And she was very proud of having controlled her limp that well. Yeah, it was a good test, too.
Did you say patients are afraid of the truth?
Aren't they? Why does big Zeppelin woman come in and say, I'm trifle overweight? And a man with pot belly, he hasn't seen his feet for years. Say he's a trifle overweight. And why does a patient who goes on 3 months long binges, they're drunk for 3 months or 6 months at a time, say, I've got a slight alcohol problem? Because they're paid to pitch the truth.
Did you ever work with her on the spasticity or just on the weight?
Just on the weight. I taught her she could control. And thereafter, she controlled it. And that taught her you didn't always have to wave her arms around all directions. And of course, especially can't control it. I can use artificial means of control. Doing that, you gradually learn a muscle pattern over the years, and it reduces the amount of elasticity. And people are prone to cut down the seriousness of their problem and balloon out their troubles.
Balloon out their troubles.
Caused by a little neurosis. So you differentiate between the troubles they encounter and the actual neurosis.
So maybe they tend to diminish what? They tend to diminish what?
Their actual problem.
The actual problems and balloon out.
The trouble it occasions them.
Balloon out the trouble that occasions them?
No, that the neurosis causes.
Oh, balloon out the trouble the neurosis causes. Right.